find out that your favourite... The camera's over here, isn't it? So you find out that your favourite book or animated series is being brought to life in a brand new remake. And you are... sceptical. After all, there's already been countless remakes of pretty much everything you've ever liked, each one being even worse than the other. But maybe this one will be better. After all, you can't judge a film before it's come out. Can you? But then you see an article about the chosen cast. And then set photos are leaked. Then the teaser trailer comes out. And then the full trailer. But then it's too late, and you realise that that one thing you loved has just been destroyed, partially, by Hollywood. And there's nothing you can do about it except perhaps share your wrath on the internet, which you do for a while until the next topic comes up that you hyperfixate over, and by the time the film actually comes out, you've completely forgotten that it existed. And you're only reminded about it because one of those "I watched this so you don't have to" videos pops up on your YouTube homepage. So, yes, it does seem that no matter how low we set the bar, we still get disappointed, particularly for me, with the costumes. Especially with a lot of recent historical or fantasy films, the costumes have just been meh. So anyway, hello there, my name is Amelia, and I'm an artist who likes clothes. And this video is a bit different than it was intended to be, because I actually started working on this video a few months ago, and it was going to be where I discussed the costumes from two films, that being the upcoming Wuthering Heights and also the 2025 Snow White. But I've been taking way too long editing this video, and the runtime is just a bit too long, so I've decided instead of making it one big video, I'm going to cut them into two parts. So this is part one. So this is part one of me redesigning some costumes that have been missing the mark, to say the least. So I have nothing else to say. Let's move on with the video. Oh, before we move on, I did want to mention that even though I am talking about the costumes and I will be bringing up the costume designers throughout the videos, I don't entirely place the blame on them, because I think that when it comes to film costumes, it isn't always the designer themselves that has the last say. A lot of influence can come from the producers or the directors or sometimes even the actors themselves. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Okay. Oh. Excuse me. I was just writing my next best-selling novel. Oh, why am I all in black, you say? You see, I recently lost a distant family member who just so happened to leave me their mansion and their entire fortune, which is just a common occurrence in Victorian novel life. I think, though, I maybe look like a wicked stepmother. So anyway, there is a new adaptation coming up of Wuthering Heights, being set to be released in 2026. And now, I'll be honest, I don't have that much interest in a remake, particularly this remake. I've never read Wuthering Heights, but I do like the 1939 film and even the 90s musical with Cliff Richard, which is unintentionally hilarious but does have very good songs. I must admit I have found myself rather absorbed in the online drama that this film seems to have created. Not only has the casting of Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi caused a lot of confusion and particular controversy, but also some leaked photos have led many, including myself, to think, what on earth is going on in the costume department? Photos of Margot Robbie in both a wedding dress and a morning dress have been circulating around social media, and, well, they look bad. So before I continue, I do want to point out that I will be giving away some spoilers of the story, so if that's something you don't want to hear, then you might want to skip this part of the video. So the actual setting for this adaptation is a little unclear. According to one article, it's being set in the late 1800s, even though the silhouette of the costumes seem to imply that it's being set in the 1860s. even though the book was published in 1847 and the plot is actually set in the 1700s, so quite a stretched timeline. Because, as I said, I've never read Wuthering Heights, I didn't actually know that it was set in the late 18th century, because most adaptations set it in the Victorian era for a few reasons, some of which I do feel the need to go over and debunk. The main reason being aesthetics. Wuthering Heights, as well as all of the Bronte novels, are primarily considered Gothic literature. And of course we generally associate Gothic themes with the Victorian era. But the thing is, things like superstitions, social distinctions, mourning dress, romantic letters, madness in the family, and anything that we would characterise as Gothic are all things that existed in the 18th century. In fact, the first ever Gothic novel, The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole, was in fact first published in 1764. Another reason is that the book takes place over a significant amount of years, and according to Google, the ever-changing fashion of the Victorian era is a good way of visualising the years going by without having to actually swap out actors. And, I do hope they use this technique in Wuthering Heights, but it could also be done in the 18th century, especially the later end when silhouettes were changing from low-waisted and wide skirts to more high-waisted and slim skirts. I just think it'd be interesting to see a version of Wuthering Heights actually set in the time that it's meant to be set in. Anyway, let's take a look at the dresses, starting with Cathy's funeral dress. So I'm going to presume that the scene being filmed here is of the funeral of Cathy's father, Mr. Earnshaw. I can't really think of any other funerals that Cathy and Heathcliff would be attending, so I'm going to presume that is where they are in the story. So if that is the case, Cathy and Heathcliff would be roughly between 12 and 16. Guessing that, she's probably closer to 16. Firstly, why is she wearing an off-the-shoulder dress? She's at a funeral. Off-the-shoulder dresses were worn at formal events, usually in the evening, but certainly not at a funeral. The Victorians were especially strict about dress code. There are examples of off-the-shoulder mourning dresses, but again these would be worn at more parties or evening events. For actual funerals, women were expected to dress very modestly, in very plain fabric with as little shine as possible. Which brings me to the next thing I don't like about this dress, and it's the fact that it's glittery. Why is it glittery? Why? If there's any story where glitter just doesn't belong, it's Wuthering Heights. I also don't particularly like the gold cross at the front of the dress. I think it looks a little bit odd and unnecessary. The overall silhouette of the dress is a bit plain. I know that the fabric needs to be plain, but I think it would have been a lot more interesting if they had gone for, more interesting sleeves and the wider hoop skirt of the period. I think the only thing I do like about the ensemble is probably the veil. I do like a dramatic black veil. And also, veils were worn in the 19th century, particularly by the middle and upper class, which Cathy is from. So, 1 point for historical accuracy, I suppose. Which, speaking of historical accuracy, you might be wondering, does it really matter in a film? Which is something that I want to talk about, because I believe that, one, people who like history care. They notice those things. It's one of the reasons that we watch historical dramas, because we want to be submerged in a different time than our own. And I think that sometimes if you make it too obviously modern, or if it's too obvious when the film was made, it can sometimes be a little hard to believe. And two, costumes obviously play a big part in building a setting or a mood of a story. And I think that the choice to go for either historical accuracy or not is one that should be thought out carefully and not just selected at random. My camera fell. Not all films or TV shows need historical accuracy. In fact, many can benefit from taking artistic liberties if it helps to accentuate a particular aesthetic or theme. But when a film is a serious drama and its entire story is centered around a very specific time in history, then I do think that more time and care should be put into the costumes in order to make that setting more believable. Not that Emerald Fennell, the director of this remake, would agree with me, because according to her, there's no need to be accurate. It's just a book. Which... Emerald? Someone who likes Wuthering Heights offend you, so your revenge is to just trash their favourite novel? Because it does seem like that. So, anyway, of course I had to have a go at redesigning my own version of this dress, and even though I would like to see this adaptation set in the 1700s, I decided to design the dress based on the film's setting in the 1850s, 1860s. I did, however, maybe do both. So, beginning with the actual dress, because the entire ensemble is just plain black, I wanted the shape and fabric to be interesting. Just a few details here and there to make the dress look a bit less basic. So, for the fabric, I pictured velvet, not only because it's very luxurious, but because velvet barely reflects any light, it creates a very sharp matte silhouette, which I think helps to emphasize the gothic drama of the outfit. For the bodice, she is wearing what I recently found out is called a pelerine, which is a shawl sometimes made of the same fabric as the dress, and would be worn over the shoulders to create that sort of V shape down the front, as well as adding more warmth to the shoulders, which I assume would be very useful for someone who's attending a funeral on the Yorkshire Moors. There are also fabric tassels on the sleeves and a bow at the back, both of which probably wouldn't be noticed straight away, but just to add a little touch of interest to the dress. And of course I gave her a huge hoop skirt, because what is the point of setting a film in the 1860s if you're not going to take advantage of the iconically massive skirts? I was going to style her hair down to emphasise her youth, but it didn't really go with the outfit, so I just tied her hair up instead. Maybe the film will raise her age from 16, seeing that she is being played by an actress in her 30s. And finally, I gave her a small black bonnet, with a long black veil, because, as I said earlier, I like a long black veil. Also, I thought it might be nice to pin a stick of heather to her bodice, just to give a small pop of colour, and because Cathy is famously associated with heather. So this is how I would design the Victorian Cathy. And also I did a rough sketch for a Georgian Cathy too, which is mostly the same concept, but in the form of an 18th century English gown, with a sheer black fichu wrapped around the neck, long gloves, and small black flowers in her hair to attach the veil to. So now let's talk about the wedding dress. Oh, this? You see, with my newfound wealth, I was finally able to marry that country boy. Look, I'm just staying on theme here, okay? So anyway, these photos of Margot Robbie in the wedding dress is actually what brought to my attention the fact that they were even remaking Wuthering Heights, which, not the best first impression. I don't even know where to start with this. It's technically Victorian. You know, it's got a hoop skirt and puff sleeves, and it is again off the shoulder, but this time it is acceptable, seeing as there are many examples of off the shoulder wedding dresses, including Queen Victoria's, which I do think this dress has probably been inspired by, especially with the pleated skirt. But somehow it just looks all wrong. You know, I agree with this one comment I read that said that it looks like it belongs in the 1980s, because it does. I think the main reason for that is the overall silhouette of the dress, and the fact that it's glittery again. So anyway, let's break it down. Firstly, I know I just said that off the shoulder is perfectly acceptable for a wedding dress, but I just think it's a bit too far off the shoulder. Yeah, Victorians would wear them slightly higher up with a dip in the middle, creating kind of a V-neck shape. The hoop skirt is also just too visible through the skirt, which ends up making it look a bit cheap. I think she really needs to wear some petticoats underneath to really smooth out the skirt. Her hair is straight with a sort of interesting plait at the back, which, does look pretty, and I could definitely see it at a Ren fair, but it's just not very Victorian. Cathy would be around 18 at this point, so I think an updo would have really helped signify her coming into adulthood. But I can also understand wanting to keep her hair down in order to make it look more youthful, but I just think some sort of curl I think would have looked better. This is a bit like what they did with Meg in the 2019 Little Women, where it just doesn't make sense for her hair to be down. But fun fact, it's the same costume designer, so... Now I've got to talk about the elephant in the room, the white elephant in the room. That is the colour of the dress. Now I've seen so many comments about how she shouldn't be wearing white because Queen Victoria was the first to wear a white wedding dress and Wuthering Heights is set before then. But one, as I mentioned earlier, they're not setting it in the 18th century, they're in fact setting it later, probably after Queen Victoria's wedding, which was in 1840. But, even if it was set in the 1780s like in the book, there is still a chance that she could be wearing a white dress. There are many examples of white wedding dresses throughout history, including Mary Queen of Scots, who wore a white wedding dress 300 years before Victoria. It's just that it wasn't common practice, especially those who came from a lower income home. They would have usually just worn their Sunday best. In the case of Cathy Earnshaw, she is, spoiler alert, marrying a very wealthy man, and with her being a character who is primarily marrying him for wealth and status, she would very well probably buy a brand new wedding dress just for that day. Maybe not a plain white dress, but, perhaps something with a bit of a coloured pattern or floral print on it. She also wears an extremely long veil, which I imagine is probably going to be used in some sort of dramatic shot of her veil floating over the moors with the sun setting on the mist, because if that isn't the case, I will be questioning the impracticality of such a long veil. And finally, I do need to talk about what I consider the worst part, and that is the bouquet. For some reason, she's holding what I consider to be the ugliest floral bouquet I've ever seen. For some reason, the flowers don't even look real. So anyway, for my 1800s wedding dress design, I also gave her an off-the-shoulder dress, but with a V neckline rather than a straight one, a bit closer to what Queen Victoria had. The skirt is a pleated hoop skirt with long lace trim around the shoulders and bottom of the skirt, with small bow details. Victorians really liked embellishments on their wedding dresses, and I just think a bit of lace gives the dress a touch of grandeur without looking too over the top. I also didn't make the dress pure white, but rather a creamy antique white. For her hairstyle, I gave her an updo with long ringlets. That way her hair could look both up and elegant while still looking somewhat youthful. And around her head she wears a wreath of wild flowers, including heather obviously, because I just thought it looked pretty. And I made her veil floor length to retain the floating over the moors image that I had in my head, but not extremely long, because I personally think that a really long veil with a really big dress is maybe a little too much? I don't know. I'm not exactly sure of my opinion on that. And finally, for her bouquet, I gave her heather and wildflowers to match her flower crown, because I just think those flowers match with Catherine's persona and also goes well with the romantic Victorian atmosphere. And again, I did a quick sketch of what her dress could have been had it been set in the 18th century. I gave her a robe à la Française, which is basically just a big dress with a long train going down the back. Again, I coloured the dress a creamy white and added a floral pattern to help the dress look a bit more of its time. I couldn't really see a bright or pastel colour palette fitting in with Wuthering Heights, so I made the flowers on the dress a muted red. I gave her a slightly longer veil than the Victorian look because I thought it complemented the silhouette of the dress better. And also, a fun fact, in the 18th century veils were really expensive, so I just thought that for Cathy to be wearing such a long veil could work as a sort of symbol of her newfound wealth. So in conclusion, of course we can't judge a film before it's even come out, But from what I've seen so far, it does seem like Emerald Fennell's adaptation is just another victim of carelessness and also reckless name dropping. Even though costume designer Jacqueline Duran and actors Margot, Robbie and Jacob Elordi are all famous and very skilled and successful at what they do, doesn't necessarily mean that they're right for this particular film, especially the actors. So you've got Margot Robbie, who is a 34-year-old actress playing the part of a teenager, and instead of giving her the wild, careless look that we perhaps would imagine her character to have, she still looks like Barbie. And as for the main character, Heathcliff is a racially ambiguous character who is believed to have come from Romany descent, because multiple times in the book he's described as being a dark-skinned gypsy, and is also suggested by one of the characters as being possibly a Lascar, American or Spanish castaway. Lascar being a nickname at the time for a sailor from Southeast Asia. Also, a big part of the story is that Heathcliff is treated cruelly and disrespectfully by all the people around him because he looks different and comes from a different background than everyone else. So, knowing all of that, do you think that Jacob Elordi is a good fit for that role? Because I don't. Why couldn't they have picked a lesser known actually Romany actor? Because for one thing, it could have been a good opportunity for a smaller actor to really break into film. Also, it would have been a great way of bringing Romany talent more into the public eye. Also, there was a comment that I read saying that the actors are wrong because they're just not weird enough to play Heathcliff and Cathy. And I think that makes sense in a way, because when you think that it is such a dramatic, theatrical, mad story, so I think it would really benefit to have actors with theatrical or even Shakespearean experience. Anyway, I'm done thinking about this film. Let's move on. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to take any form and drive the like button mad. Take the heart of the subscribe button and pinch it to death. And whilst you're at it, make sure you don't leave the bell icon in the abyss where it cannot find you. Because when you do all of those things, you become a part of my arty party. The party where only the most book-accurate artists are invited. Shout out to Chelsea Green for her lovely jubbly drawing of me, and I will leave a link to her channel below, so make sure you go and subscribe to her. Make sure to keep a lookout for my Snow White video that should be coming out soon. So I'll see you then. Bye!
I cannot live without my life! I cannot live without my soul!